Ukraine Today is joined by the artist from the United Kingdom, Mr. Jamie McCartney. Mr. McCartney, welcome to Ukraine Today.
Thank you.
Mr. McCartney, you're participating in the third Cultural Congress happening this weekend in Lviv, and its slogan is the role of culture during the times of crisis. In your opinion, what should be the role of crisis, of culture during the crisis?
It's a good question. You know, a culture, I guess, is a thing that separates us from animals. So, you know, and culture, in my opinion, must be preserved and protected at all costs. People say that maybe it's an expensive, you know, indulgence when there's more important things going on. But, you know, my opinion would be, you know, without culture, then what are you fighting for?
You are participating in the panel, which is titled Provocative Art.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the provocative art? How important it is in the sphere of art, in the sphere of culture?
It's been interesting to me to be here because I've been wondering: am I an artist who is an activist, or am I an activist that uses art? So I think in this case, the stuff I'm talking about, I'm an activist who uses art as a tool of my expression. So I think it's very important, and it's been a theme in art forever, I think. You know, the point of sort of provocative art is that you can say things very simply and very quickly to a huge number of people in a lot of different languages with just one simple image. And that's got a lot more power very often than words on their own. So I think that it's an invaluable tool for people who are interested in creating change in their society. Art has to be the #1 go-to thing before the gun, I think.
Obviously, one of your most famous pieces of provocative art is the Great Wall of Vagina. Can you tell us what inspired you to do this, and what was your main message behind this?
Okay.
If there was any.
Okay. Yeah, there was a message behind it. It would have been 5 years of wasted time if I didn't have any reason for doing it, you know. Previous to that piece, I was commissioned by a sex museum in London to cast genitals and breasts of men and women. And I discovered during the course of this project that a lot of women have a lot of anxieties about the way they look down there. And so much so they're resorting to having operations to correct what they think is a problem. Now, you know, for me, as a man who likes women, I'm like, don't cut off pieces of yourself that give you pleasure. This is ridiculous. You know, so, but, you know, women don't know what other women look like. This is the thing. And everyone it's normal in life for the human condition to want to know how you fit in. They want to know what other people look like, where you fit into this. But without that information, then you're easily persuaded by a plastic surgeon who might tell you, well, you know, this is wrong, or, you know, images from pornography which you might not look like. And so people get these anxieties. It ruins their sex lives. It gives them, you know, all kinds of relationship problems. So this was the beginning of that project, to kind of do something about it. I showed if I can show people what normal people look like, then their anxiety can go away. So that was the beginning. Because I also cast men for this project, and I cast myself, I realized after casting 18 men and comparing them for the first time with me, that I was perfectly normal. So for me, this was a bit of an epiphany. I'm like, great, I'm not a porn star, but I'm normal. And so this is kind of the beginning. So I realized casting can have a really powerful effect. So that's why it started, and it just kind of went on and on and on. It went crazy, this project.
So the main message was to show, particularly to the women, that there are all different forms and shapes, right?
Yes, like whatever you got, it's normal. And that's the point, yeah.
What do the critics say about this piece? Those who criticize the piece.
That's interesting. I mean, if you make art like this, you have to expect a bit of flack. You're going to draw some fire, you know. And of course, there are people who don't like it. There are people that like it. There are people that ignore it, you know, all these things. So, you know, some people might say it's disrespectful to women. That's probably because they don't understand what I've done. You know, a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction to work like this based on their own prejudices. You know, it might not have anything to do with what the art is about. They haven't gone past the image. But I think that's the purpose of the image, is to upset people, you know, wake people up. That's kind of what I do as an artist. So if I've pissed some people off, great, you know. Maybe when they've calmed down, they'll then think about what I'm trying to do, and maybe I can make some progress even with those people as well. I have a lot of correspondence, so people email me all the time. Will find me on, there's a Facebook page just for the sculpture, you know. The sculpture has its own website. How many sculptures have their own website anyway? So I get a lot of correspondence from fans, you know, people who say, this has changed my life. Thank you for doing that. And that's really humbling for me. It makes me realize that I did something right. I did something right with my life. That's a nice feeling.
Mr. McCartney, going back to the forum, to the Cultural Congress, how important it is? Well, Ukraine is in a big crisis right now. There is a war going on in eastern parts. The country's economy is in deep crisis. How important do you think it is to have such types of congresses who discuss art rather than how to save the country's economy?
I do think it's important. I think, you know, there should be congresses, you know, discussing everything. I mean, and certainly this is particular to art in times of crisis. And I think one thing that this Congress is trying to do is to say, look, it's not just a war going on here. You know, we're still people living our lives, you know, interested in culture. We have, you know, because, you know, from the outside world, it's you know, people who don't really understand or don't really pay attention. They're just going to say, you know, Ukraine's a war zone. Well, yeah, part of it is, but you know, the rest of it, and I'm sure even in the war zone, there's people making art and passionate about art and music, and you know, it's the love of life, and that's what culture is, I think. So I think it's very important.
And if talking about the provocative arts, there aren't a lot of artists, contemporary artists, Ukrainian contemporary artists, who follow this technique, who do this. Do you think there is a potential for Ukraine and for Ukrainian artists, for young Ukrainian artists? As I said, there were a lot of students attending your panel discussion yesterday, to do something what you were doing.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I sort of, this is almost by accident for me that I ended up making this kind of work. So I took a very particular degree called experimental studio art, you know, nearly 25 years ago. I graduated. And, you know, I hadn't realized at the time it wasn't necessarily the road to riches, you know, but it was very experimental. It was all about politics, social politics, and finding different ways to communicate and different ways to make art. And for me, it was perfect. You know, it really suited the kind of person I was. I was always a campaigner. I used to work on a peace boat. You know, for me, this was very important. But, you know, you have to be a passionate campaigner in order to make this kind of work. You have to care about stuff. Now, from the people I've spoken to, people do care about stuff, you know. So maybe, you know, there is room for this kind of work to be made. I think particularly if it's not common, then it's going to be more shocking and people are going to pay attention to it. So I would say this is a good opportunity. But, you know, don't expect to get rich, but then most artists don't expect to get rich anyway. So,
so talking about campaigning, this is a very interesting subject. Do you think that Ukrainian artists could campaign against Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine?
I'd be surprised if they aren't already. I mean, there must be artists out there making music, making poetry, making art that is reflecting their experience, you know, and I'm quite sure, because that's what artists do, you know. And so, yeah, you know, I'm sure they are already. They might not have, you know, they might not have the exposure that I've got. You know, I'm lucky, but I'm quite sure it is a very powerful tool, because, like I say, an image is worth 1,000 words. You can say something very quickly, you know, but of course there are consequences to making this kind of work. You know, to every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So you can draw a lot of fire. Look what happened to Charlie Hebdo. You know, this is the kind of problems that happen when you stir up a hornet's nest, you know, and so you have to be careful what you do and be responsible as well. Just because you make art doesn't mean you should, you know, just because you can say something doesn't mean you should say something. So there's a balance you have to have, particularly if you're you know, conveying something which is emotional, you know. It's so, I do think that there's a lot of potential for this kind of work to be done, because young people care, and they are the real engines of change in most society. It's young people. You know, I'd rather see them doing something with a paintbrush than a gun.
Well, looks like indeed there is a very thin line in this type of art, the provocative art. Mr. McCartney, many thanks for coming to us and talking to us. This was Volodymyr Sulu for Ukraine Today, together with a British artist, Mr. Jamie McCartney. Thank you for watching us.